Lead your journey into Cabernet Sauvignon magnificence. Hi, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, and welcome to Séjour, Freddie Diaz's marvellous restaurant at the Houghton Hotel, strangely enough, in the heart of Houghton in Johannesburg. Now, Freddie's travelled the world, he's worked at the Potluck Club, and all of those different influences converge here in what is a terrific menu, but importantly for me, it's also a lovely wine list, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later on in the show. Who do we have this week? Well, we hang out at the Saxon, where Kevin Arnold and his team present a brand new vintage of the Gem, that first big rock star, gee, does it cost this much? Now established as one of South Africa's finest. First, though, we head to another slightly newer kid on the block, but one with a massive reputation, the brand new wines of Damascene by Jean Smit. Hello, welcome to Great Domains in the heart of Johannesburg, where Derek Kilpin and his team happily launder international millions through the medium of wine, and do so with some terrific international wine, but also with a very carefully selected array of South African wine. And it's South African wine we're talking about today. Now, if I go back to the start of lockdown or thereabouts, I got a phone call from a young lady called Marie, who was French and very insistent. She had some wine of Jean Smit that I must drink. Oh no, it's lockdown. I can't. No, I must drop it off. It's very important. She'd wait outside my gates. She'd stalk me in shopping centres. She was adamant. And I thought, why are you so adamant to get this wine? It can't really be that good. And then I tried it after lockdown and I realized exactly why she was so insistent that I get that wine. And I've now had a fair amount of the Damascene, and I've had the man behind it on the show a number of times, looking, I'm sad to say, even more dapper than I am. And I wore my very coolest shirt today. Jean Smit, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great. And just to see how things evolved since we last spoke is just immense, so thank you.
And that sense of evolution is so important to this conversation, to my sense of where you're at, because you have not been running this particular brand for very long, and yet it is spoken of in the kind of tones by people who like their wine as already almost a cult classic, which shouldn't be the case because you've only just got started, and yet already there's a magic and a mystery, and your wine has found its way into the hearts of so many people so quickly. How?
Yeah. Thank you. It's certainly not something that happened overnight. The labels on the bottles came recently, but the thought certainly went through the mind many years before. I got into the industry only in my 20s, so for me it's not like growing up like Marie in France and it's kind of in your veins from day one. For me it was something it's a skill that I learned, but the passion, that is something that came a lot more rapidly. And it's really, so it's about relationships that's been out there all these years, respecting the other mentors that's been out there before me and not stepping on toes, and just loyalty from producers. I think that's pretty much what is the core of what we do, and then obviously to have the goods in the bottle, that always helps.
The translation of that vision, a vision that had been building for so many years, into the actual wine. It sounds quite simple when you say it. I've had this idea, now I'm going to make it, and here we go, here is amazing wine. It is a little bit more complicated than that. What do you feel has been, just from your perspective as the winemaker, the secret to being able to get this grand idea and translate it into what we now have in front of us?
I think, as a student, I wasn't studying as much as my parents would like to think I did. But I think at this stage of my life, it's listening. It's listening and tasting. So don't be stuck in your own world. Be open for new ideas. And if you work with someone up in the Pekingese Kloof or in the Ceres-Witzenberg or wherever, and you meet a new farmer, you need to understand that they also have basically a few generations sometimes on the farm, and you need to listen to them of what is actually making this site so special. And sometimes they send you to someone else that makes it even more special. So it's about really, so I think valuing other people's interest in that farm. And then if you can start, I mean, if you look at the Syrah from Stellenbosch, we're starting to plant there as well next year. We prepped the soil this year. It's something that we saw the spots. We started working with the farmer. He started trusting us, and now actually planting for us on the farm as well. So it's trust, I think, is the main game.
There's a real sense to your wine, and I know it sits with your wine philosophy very distinctly, that sense of place to wine. And you spend a lot of time exploring areas and finding ways to create wine. And at our last tasting, we had some wine from Cederberg and some wine from Stellenbosch, and same grape, but dramatically different. And you'd brought out those differences so wonderfully. And that sense of adventure to what you do does seem to be at the core of your wine philosophy.
Yeah, so you'll see on our labels, they're all pretty much the same, and they're simplistic in style, but if it stands on a shelf, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's really just people recognize that label, and then they go and pick it up and they start reading closer, and we take them on a journey through South Africa. So if it's a wine of origin Cederberg, or if it's a wine of origin Stellenbosch, we want the people to taste it and see why it's different. And sometimes they have an idea of what it should taste like from that area because they had it from certain producers before, and then we do it with a flip. So it's just doing our own spin on different areas and things that excite us from that area. So if it's spice from Stellenbosch, whereas most people go maybe for fruit, that's the kind of thing we do. We look, most of the wines are 13.5 alcohols. So for us, it's about perfume, elegance, purity. That's what we're about.
All right. Well, let me kick off with some of the Semillon. I made the mistake earlier this year of asking the wonderful Maëlys Lambert about Semillon, and an hour and a half later she was still answering. But there is that almost obsessive love of Semillon amongst those who know it. And
so it's something that for me, that kind of white peach is always there in the beginning, but as it evolves, I mean, all that lanolin that forms after a while, that's really what we're after. But I mean, during its youth, we leave it on the lees, both of these for 11 months. So just that kick of flint that you get also there, and that little bit of creaminess that you get, that's, yeah.
The Semillon's, I think, kind of quietly on the rise as a grape in South Africa as more people start to hear the story and learn about it. Chenin is very much a South African rock star, and all over the world we're getting that, not just here. But you've clearly put a lot of thought, a lot of time into working out how you create this blended Chenin and getting it just right.
Yeah, so Chenin, I mean, it's probably the wine with the most competition when it comes to white in the country. So people would ask, why do you do it? But there's nothing wrong with a little bit of competition. And the thing is, for me, so the three different soil types that I just explained to you, the one gives me a lot more acidity, the one gives me a lot more depth and that kind of core of concentration, and the one is all about the mouthfeel. So it's depending on the year what is thrown out to us by nature. Of is it a warmer year? Is it a leaner year? And then for all our wines, that's how we do it. We rather blend different blocks to get to a balanced wine, because it needs to be about balance, all of these wines, and that you get to the bottom of the bottle. So that's for us the most important with this wine. So you'll see there's just tons of blossom here. It's like it's not overly concentrated in the way that it gives you an idea that it's sweet. There's no sugar there, but still amazing stone fruit that we get with that blossom on the Chenin.
It almost sounds that alongside of being a superb winemaker, you kind of need a PhD in geology to be able to pull all of this off.
No, it's just a love to see what is going out there. I mean, I think I said to you before, walking up in the mountain in Cirrus at 1,100 meters above sea level, and kicking a rock, and it's got fossils in it, so of sea fossils. So that gives you an idea that it's a lot more intense than we think it is. But we don't want to overcomplicate it for the people out there. People need to still understand that wine is not supposed to be daunting. It's just there to be enjoy. But something like when we get to the Syrahs just now, you'll see how differently they are when they are planted in different soils and different terroirs.
All right, the Moyamika. This is the only one under the Moyamika brand.
Yeah, so We actually, the last 2 weeks, we started planting Chardonnay on the farm. So Moyamika, obviously, this is just in remembrance of her and just elegance, and that's why we do Burgundian varieties in that area, obviously because of cool climate. It's just, if you look at the soil, so this is Bockerfeld shale. So you obviously got a lot of structure there, but it's perfumed, that kind of sour cherry that they get there as well. That's something that's for us extremely important with the Moyamika Pinot Noir.
I'm sure you've just said something really important and interesting. I haven't listened to any of it. This is just awesome. No, I was, of course, listening, but you just drift off into that cloud of Burgundian happiness as Pinot Noir. And, that perfume, Pinot Noir is not as big and thick-set and shouldered as some of the other reds, and yet the nose of a great Pinot Noir just sweeps you off your feet, and that perfume's glorious. Breakfast is off to a fabulous start. I can highly recommend the Semillon Chenin Blanc Pinot Noir introduction to start your day. These will now go into a spittoon that will be drunk by Derek Kilpin for his dinner this evening. I love that you've added a Cabernet Franc, because I have a distinct weakness for the grape, and I'm going to watch this one because I think it's lovely already, but it's got some evolution ahead of it, which I shall follow closely.
Yeah, it's also it's a wine that showed me. Everyone said, please never bottle Semillon or never bottle Cabernet Franc because it's never going to sell. And the Semillon was the first one out. The Cabernet Franc was the second one out. So don't always follow trends. Believe in what you can do different, and do it great every year, and then people will follow.
So don't follow them, set them, and you'll. Right.
So strap yourself in. The next one is going to be very interesting. It's Syrah, from going through the same hands of me and my team, and then completely different in the glass. So the first one you've got on your left, that's wine of origin Stellenbosch. The one that's in the center, that's wine of origin Swartland, and the last one that you're going to have is wine of origin Cederberg. So that's from a farm called Driehoek up in the Cederberg. Phenomenal people and phenomenal vineyards as well. People always ask me which one is your favorite, and I don't want to choose, but I mean the Stellenbosch is obviously the one that started the story for us. The discovery of working with 15 different sites only in Stellenbosch to get to a certain style, and then we signed up these two long term, and you just want to have more and more of that wine as well. So that's the first one that you've got there.
You're investing rather a lot of faith in us as consumers, Jean, in saying that we will be wandering through the aisles of Pick and Pay or flicking through the wine list at Marble and saying, yeah, I don't really want the Stellenbosch Damascene Syrah. Have you got some of the Swartland? Have you got a bottle of the other one? Believing that we will pick these out. And that's a vote of faith in yourself as well, that you've created these three distinct products that are not necessarily going to alienate one person of another, but people probably find a favourite and gravitate towards it.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of people to not only take from one wine, and that's also why all our wines are exactly the same price in the Damascene range, because we want people to experiment. So I'm even forward for people buying mixed cases so that we can take them on a journey through that case of wine. So it's especially in these next couple of days, it's about sharing the love with everyone that's actually passionate about the brand, and not just giving to the first one that comes around and buys everything. So that's for me. I want to urge people to go out and try these wines and try the different ones. Don't just have that preconception of I like Stellenbosch Cab or I like Stellenbosch Chenin and only go for that. Try the other ones. You'll be surprised of what you see in the bottle.
Jean, thank you so much. It's another terrific range, and I love the wine as much as I love the story, but most of all I love the fact that you are just so absolutely driven in what you're doing and creating this wine, and it clearly gives you so much pleasure, the occasional heartbreak notwithstanding, and the beneficiaries of us, we get to drink it. So thank you for this morning. Thank you for sharing your wine and your wine story. And I promise, I'm booking my Greyhound ticket. I'll be on the bus down to visit you, and I can't wait.
Good. Thank you so much, and thank you for again having me on the show. And just for the people out there, just drink South Africa. That's what it's about. You don't only have to do our brand. There's such amazing wines out there. Just drink South Africa and spread the word.
Well, I said they had some pretty good wine at Séjour. How about that? We've just met Jean Smit, And here is some of his Damascene. It's a really nice collection. Some Thelema, some Newton Johnson, bit of creation, some Lariche. They've got the wines here of Lismore, Samantha O'Keefe, some bubbles. I've seen some Lelude and a bit of Silverthorn. Great collection. La Shiraz en masse. It's a terrific, terrific selection of wine. Now, speaking of excellent wine, don't forget this month's competition on Dan Really Likes Wine. Your chance to win a weekend for 2 people at Bartney, the lovely wine estate in the Bannock Valley, and with that, a case of the Hourglass Chardonnay, 5 stars from Platter and glorious for breakfast in the Winelands. Very simple to enter. Just tell us why you'd like to go and stay at Bartney and tag both the Dan Really Likes Wine Show and tag Bartney on either Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or wherever you use your social media. Will find you and you could be on your way out. So great wine from Bartney. I'll tell you what else is pretty great wine. I've just happened to find some here. It's the Gem from Waterford, but I'll let Kevin Arnold tell you more about it. Mark, Larry, guys, a warm welcome. Lovely to have you both back on the show.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Great to be here.
And appropriate to be at the Saxon for a wine that is as luxurious as this, because the Gem is one of those really top bracket, top tier South African wines in every sense. Give us a bit of a history, Kevin, of what this wine is and how it came about.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think the story about the Gem is an incredible journey. It fills one with enormous passion and feeling for a sense of place. Waterford up on the slopes of the Helderberg is truly unique. It's a 120 hectare property that was pretty run down and derelict when we took it over in 1998. But what I learned very early was how different the soil types were on the property. And as a result, I tried to select the right varieties, which were quite unusual for Stellenbosch, I think still to this day. But the Gem was a journey of embarking on a flavor profile that I'd had in my mind. Through my travels around the world, I tasted incredible wines from different wine regions. And I felt that there was a possibility of creating something like that in Stellenbosch. And it's not very often that a winemaker, in terms of my partnership with Jeremy and Lee Ord, was able to choreograph and design, plant, and establish something from scratch. So the Gem is an incredible story of a sense of place at Waterford, a blend of potentially 11 different red grape varieties. We've never done that, and most probably never will. But it's a variation of selection of grape varieties, each vintage, to get a wine that is both spicy on aromatics. In terms of mouthfeel and texture, it's incredibly smooth. It gives you kind of layered flavors of the different fruit components. And then at the end of the day, I think the ultimate test of the Gem is in terms of the length of finish. So a long story in short, the Gem is a journey, and we're still on that journey.
I love the fact that you use length of finish, because that for me is so important. It doesn't take me long to finish this at all. In fact, it was about 20 minutes the last time I had a bottle. And that's because it is such a wonderful composition. Mark, when you came into the Waterford team, when you started being given some of the reins, how nerve-wracking was it to start when you first did getting involved with this flagship wine?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, it was a huge, I think, onset or a huge mountain that I sort of had to climb, because I joined a relatively young winery, 10 years old almost at the time. But I mean, it had made so many milestones already. It planted, as Kevin mentioned, these outrageous varietals at the time. They priced a wine which was unheard of in South Africa. So I think there are a lot of hurdles that I had to climb. And I suppose the biggest thing in my mind was how can I join the team and add value and try and make a better wine and make a better Gem and sort of help the team make a better Gem. So it's been very inspiring for me. I think I'm relatively a traditionalist when it comes to making wine, but I think there's always this sort of South African flair, and I did see that in Waterford, that there was a little bit of something different, something genuine and authentic at Waterford. And I think the Gem is one of those wines that's leading that story of not just making a great wine, but making a great South African wine that we can be proud of to show people internationally.
Well, let's have a look at this product. We've got 3 of the vintages of the Gem. We're going to be tasting the new one shortly, but let's go back all the way to 2011, 10 years ago. And as Mark pours those out for us, Kevin, what sort of vision do you have to have when you're making these wines, given that we're drinking the brand new vintage today, which was 6 years ago. So if you're heading back to the cellar back in Stellenbosch tomorrow and you're working on the gem, it's gem that's going to be out in 2027. You've got to play Nostradamus and work out where's this wine going to be and what's the world going to like in 6 years' time.
Yeah, I guess that is the greatest challenge. But I think one gets to know, it's so important that you get to know your true footprint of where you are and what you're working with. And fortunately, having had time on my side in Stellenbosch, understanding the terroir, and spending this amount of time over 35 years on the Helderberg, I've learned that you can confidently analyze a vintage in terms of what you've got to work with, but then how you put it together is based on experience. So when you're lacking in a certain field, be it tannin, be it color, be it mouthfeel and texture, you have to supplement that. And I think one of my reasons for choosing blended red wines as my kind of forte was it's a little like being in the kitchen with a chef. You know, the ingredients are fresh, you've got things to work with. And how do you put together that flavor profile and I call it always in your DNA. You know, you can wake me up in the middle of the night and I can tell you exactly what it has to taste like. So I think that's the amazing thing about the gem. So you have components to work with, you layer those flavors, you bring them together, then ultimately you do have to have the confidence that that wine is ready to drink now when we release it. But confidently, because of my experience on the Helderberg, I know that 20 years' time, it'll still be great.
Well, I've got a slight advantage on trying this particular one because about 6 weeks ago I opened a bottle of 2011 Gem and I poured myself a glass. I then made the mistake of going through to jump on a call and I came back and my wife had finished it. And you know my wife, so you know that's a true story. So 10 years on, as I'm drinking it and loving it again, as I'm sure I will, tell us about this wine and where you find it a decade into its life.
Yeah, I think the kind of vintages, I call them 5, 7, 9, 11. They have some commonality in the sense of the tannin structures. They're a little bit on the drier side, a little bit on the dusty side, have incredible backbone and integrity. And I see these are the kind of vintages that will go a little further than the others. The other vintages tend to be a little softer, more accessible, easy on the palate as younger wines. But I just love this 11. I think it's showing extremely well now, and I find it still quite youthful, to be honest. If this was lying in a private cellar, I'd confidently tell the owner not to be in a hurry.
Mark, when you're drinking this is wine that goes back 10 years. Do you think about things like, oh, where was I 10 years ago? What was happening? How does the wine mirror my own journey?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating following wines like that, and I think that's what really attracted me to wine just in general in the beginning. It's one of those liquids that can explain a story many, many years later. So in 2011, I was at Waterford, so it's a journey closer to home. Obviously, I look at vintages a little bit differently now, 10 years on, 2011 being a relatively warm vintage, but I agree with Kevin. I think it's one of those gems that are really drinking superbly. A little bit warmer, so it's more velvety on sort of tannin structure. It's very aromatic, and I think it's a great vintage, being a little bit drier as well. What you get out of the dryness, and I think a little bit more perfuminess on the wine. And I think in South Africa, that is an element that we like to showcase because, no summers are the same, no winters are the same. It's such an experience, and I think that's why a lot of the international guests like to visit South Africa, because it just feels like a different country every time you fly in. And I feel our wines have a little bit of that as well. It's a journey, it's an experience. Even though you're drinking a very well-known brand, you're always experiencing something unique and something different each time.
That's the 2011. We've also got here some of the 2014. Take us forward 3 years. What do we find here, Mark, that's different in this wine? And is it simply a case of, well, it's had 3 more years in bottle, therefore it is different? Or is there something more to it?
Obviously, the youthfulness of the wine is definitely going to change it. So what I was chatting about earlier, those different increments or time periods, when the gem is sort of first released, and that's roughly what we're looking at, the 14 and 15, quite new off release, it's generally dominated more by sort of primary flavors, so what I sort of call cellar flavors and grape flavors. It hasn't really developed into sort of the settlement or the maturity of what wine sometimes gives across. So I do feel a lot of what people call the terroir, or the sense of place and where you situated the soil, doesn't always come out in the early days of the Gem. So I think for now you're finding a little bit of that oak barrel sort of spice and creaminess, a little bit of like a cedar oak that you find, and the fruit's still very, very prominent. You still find that sort of fresh cherryness coming from a little bit of the Sangiovese, the plum fruit that comes through. So I don't think it's really developed into its settlement, but I mean, that's what you find off the Gem when it's young. We always want the Gem to be approachable and drinkable. Yes, it can age for many years, but you can also open it on release and still be very much satisfied.
The 2015 sits before us. The wine, a long way to go, but already you can see that it has greatness ahead of it. Where would this sit for you, in as much as you can tell now, for the great gems that you've made?
The big difference being that I think the age of the vines is very much on the side of 2015, so almost 20-year-old vines, as opposed to let's say 5 and 9, which was half the age. And with that goes, I think, our better understanding of the Gem. So in terms of refinement, that's the nice thing about the Gem. With each vintage, we're learning something. So hopefully we don't end up by making the same mistakes again. But it is looking for the ultimate wine, which is never reachable.
I do have one final question to ask you, Mr. Arnold, but before I do that, just Mark, your final thoughts on this wine. And as a benchmark of Waterford, you make some lovely stuff across the board. Not everybody can afford to or wants to drink something like this, so you've got a lot of other stuff that fits into those other gaps. But how does this wine kind of lead your offering and tell the story to people of, this is Waterford, this is Stellenbosch, this is what we as a winemaking team are trying to say to the world from our terroir?
Yeah, so the Gem is that fantastic wine. I think what I like about the Gem, Dan, it's almost like it makes you feel easy and relaxed, and it's taking in an entire experience rather than really being focused on just one element of your stay. So the Gem being the picture of the entrance of our winery, it really gives you a sense of you walking into a place and everything about, from being welcomed on the farm to sitting down, tasting through various wines, from a white wine to red wine to a dessert. The whole experience sort of is packaged as the Gem. So for me, that's very warming, it's welcoming, it leads sort of, I think, an experience of sight and hospitality and enjoyment, and what I think us as South Africans like to offer.
You sum it up beautifully there. Thank you, Mark. The question I wanted to ask you, Kevin, to finish off, and it might be a tricky one to answer because it's going to involve a bit of thinking. Not that you can't do that, but you've got a lot to think about in terms of this question. If you go right back to the Delheim days, all the way through the work at Ruston Frieda, up to a nice long stint at Waterford, is there one bottle out of all of the ones that you've put your name to that stands out as the definitive wine, the best wine that Kevin Arnold has ever produced?
Yeah, it does take time to think about them, and one goes through one sort of career. I suppose it's a little bit like your children. As they grow up, they mature. You might think differently when they're born to when their 5-year-old birthdays, and 10 and 21, and then married with children. But yes, Dan is one. It's undoubtedly, and not necessarily the best vintage ever in Stellenbosch, but it's the very first Gem, 2004 Gem. It was a lifelong journey and a dream to embark on a project and to eventually be able to have that in the fruition of that concept that was in the mind rather than in real life was daunting. Luckily, Jeremy Orr didn't know too much about wine farming, and I didn't tell him what I was doing. If Jannie Engelbrecht, for argument's sake, would not plant the varieties I wanted, so he was a man who understood the wine and lived on the farm. But I guess that is a blessing, and it's the lovely story of the Gem that we could actually be creative. And I talk about that vintage because I think it was kind of a summary of my dreaming and my sort of career in the wine business, having fortunate enough to be involved with great winemakers around the world, experiencing not only time with them, tasting wines and learning the basics about classic Bordeaux, the basics about Napa Valley, the Rutherford Bench, understanding Coonawarra and places like that. And yet it was a dream come true where you could do this in Stellenbosch. So Gem 2004, that would be the one I put my name to.
So that's the new vintage of the Gem from Waterford. Kevin Arnold really is a national treasure. Now, if you come to Séjour for lunch, you get the splendid view of the golf course. It's consistently ranked as one of Gauteng's finest, but it's a lot more relaxing to sit inside, watch the golf course, and do so over some good wine. In this case, Koen's Sauvignon Blanc from Speenkop in Elgin, and a flick through a menu that's just full of excitement and full of delight. There's a picanha wagyu if you want to combine South America and Japan, loads of tapas, loads of different flavors, but come down yourself, have a good look and see what you think of the magic of Freddy Diaz. That's our show for this week. Don't forget to enter the competition that could see you off to Bartney for a couple of nights and get you a great glass, a great case of 5-star Chardonnay. That is the Hourglass, and hopefully you'll be down here at the Houghton and join Freddie and his team at Séjour soon. See you next week. Cheers.